after the Edward Snowden experience, someone would have to have their head checked to publicly fess up to being the source of such a leak, given all the travails that followed Edward Snowden after he essentially outed himself. This was a digital leak made to Al Jazeera, and one of the reasons people bring information to Al Jazeera in the past, as they did with the Palestine Papers and other projects, is because that they know we'll take every step we can to protect and shield their identity. So the way that we got these files, this digital leak, is not up for discussion, but it is, I will gladly describe for you an unprecedented window into how espionage is conducted, not just in South Africa, but the broader continent. What we have obtained is perhaps best thought of in, if you looked at a discarded, bag of rubbish, you won't know what's inside it until you open it up. Similarly, in this, it's not rubbish. It's actually very useful information, but it's an absolute assortment of things that are seemingly unrelated, but nonetheless highly newsworthy. There is a high concentration of humdrum routine intelligence cables within the South African security services that we came into possession of. And in addition to that, correspondences from a variety of Western and foreign intelligence services asking the South Africans to take certain actions or trying to influence the South African intelligence services on a certain course of action. So they're, an absolute fascinating window into how things are done, but they're a fragment in a mosaic, and we're missing very much so the rest of the painting. But what we can do is reveal what what operational cables that we can put into context, and that's why we said in our editor's note we're not publishing everything. Purely because it either wouldn't be in the public interest or it wouldn't add up to a bigger story in and of itself.
So talk about what has emerged here on the issue of Iran. Just as talks are picking up between the U.S. and Tehran, and just as Netanyahu is coming to the U.S. trying to undermine their deal, an internal cable reveals that the Mossad contradicts Netanyahu on his own claims about Iran's capabilities.
Well, there was much discussion that came after Netanyahu's 2012 UN speech that he was at loggerheads with his Mossad chief, Meir Dagan. That was discussed, and in fact, Meir Dagan even publicly said that a war with Iran would be a bad idea. But what is just, I think, was breathtaking for the journalists who work on this is to see Mossad's classified documents, a top secret assessment no less, that is now available for the entire world to peruse and read at its own leisure. I mean, clearly, Netanyahu came and spoke before the entire world, presenting information that was in direct contradiction to the country's premier intelligence service. It begs a strong question: where did he get his information from? Was he taking talking points from the Washington Institute and AEI, or was he listening to his own intelligence services, who the government of Israel pays to look after this sort of material? So it makes it a question similar to what Americans experienced in the run-up to the Iraq War. Is this based on intelligence, or is this based on political fiction? And, I'm a journalist, true. I've lived here in Qatar for going on 8 years. I'm also a citizen of this planet, and I think everyone who's a citizen of this planet who lived through the Iraq War and who think of an impending Iran war, we should do everything to scrutinize the politics behind people who wish to start a new war, particularly with Iran, which would not only be a disaster for the United States at home, but also for the region and the entire world. So as Netanyahu is going to come to the United States, I think there's every reason to have beyond a healthy skepticism of what he intends to say at his home audience, if you will, the U.S. Congress. In fact, I would say that knowing what we know now with this top secret Mossad cable, we should demand strict evidence of anything that he says before the American public, because it may in fact inform our elected officials to make a decision on whether or not to use military action to defy President Obama's diplomatic efforts, et cetera.
Clayton Swisher, in addition to the former Mossad chief, Meir Dagan, who left office in December 2010, disagreeing with Netanyahu wanting to prepare a military attack on Iran, there are other leaders in the Israel security establishment who, you write, were riled by Netanyahu's rhetoric on the Iranian nuclear threat, accusing him of messianic political leadership, pushing for military action. Can you explain?
Sure. I mean, it's long been the Israeli security military tradition where there's a class of people. They've referred to them as bitchonists, which are people that are in the security sector, but are also seen as having a rational, worldview, if you will, that want to establish some form of peace with their neighbors. Oftentimes, there's an excellent film called Gatekeepers, which I would recommend anyone watch, that interviews the last several directors of Shin Bet, their domestic intelligence service. And you find, actually, when the documentary interviewer sits with these Shin Bet directors, you find a much more pragmatic outlook and a much more realistic assessment of, for example, on the Palestinian issue, that the Israeli government can't continue, killing Palestinians if it wants to have a permanent place in the neighborhood. Yet the security people are often trumped by the politicians, the loudmouths, who are perpetually campaigning. If you think it's bad in the U.S., it's a perpetual campaign in Israel. And as a result, you don't really get mature discussions, mature conversations in the public from their leaders. And it's a very real risk. And I would hazard to guess why Israel has not been able to make peace, because time and again they have proven to not have leaders who have been thinking in the long term, but politicians who are seeing which way the winds are blowing and how they can get through the next election. So unfortunately, in some instances, the only ones that have the real assessment on Israel's security happen to be people who live in classified worlds. And I think it's extraordinary the amount of security officials that spoke out and sniped against Netanyahu, because they realize the stakes are very high. They've seen the Iraq War experience where bad intelligence got mixed into politics and people sat on it and didn't speak up. And lo and behold, now Israel has ISIS on its borders, and they're further than ever from ever being welcome in the neighborhood. It's looking back at the two-state solution is pie in the sky. So I think, frankly, as a journalist, I'm skeptical of everyone. But in this case, it's remarkable to see Mossad at such variance with the Prime Minister. If only the United States had that kind of disclosure ahead of the Iraq War between what the CIA was saying and what the Bush administration was saying, a war may have been averted.